All right, continuing my playthrough of The Other Side of the Hill. Initially, in my last video, I was playing the solo rules, which are largely similar to the cooperative rules for the game. And pretty quickly, I think I got about as far on that. I got to, I think, the start of the 1941 turn and was frankly just kind of bored. And not because the game that I was playing, the solo game, was bad. I mean, the all the various mechanisms to, with production and the political production and military directives and assigning generals to spaces and stuff like that, and controlling the war effort in terms of air support, all the little mechanisms that controlled the war effort was all interesting enough. And it was an abstracted strategic World War II game, which was fine. But I felt like it was the game that I wasn't playing that I knew was there, which was the faction influence and the competition between the different heads of sections for prestige points that was missing. And knowing that was missing made me not interested in playing, because the whole sort of thesis of this game is to replicate that factionalism and the factionalism of the German High Command, as well as the competition for prestige between, which, but think of prestige points as victory points in the game. The competition for the victory points between your heads of section, which should be each player is going to have a head of section that's responsible for making decisions on the board. And so in the solo game, there's none of the factionalism. Your decisions are all unified. There's one, you make all the decisions. There's no penalties, or bonuses for making certain decisions over others. You're just trying to make the best decisions to not win the war. You can't actually win the war in this game, but to not lose as fast. So you're trying to make those decisions without any opposition or threat to those decisions. Whereas in the competitive game, each head of section is, yes, looking to make smart decisions in terms of prosecuting the war, but if they can make a decision, say, to put a general as a leading general in a particular combat and a particular military situation, if they can pick a lesser qualified general, but one that will either get them prestige points or perhaps keep the leader from getting prestige points, any number of reasons that they would opt to say, well, in this instance, I'm not going to put the guy, the general with the best combat bonuses for the particular battle that we're looking at. I'm actually going to put this other guy in there because if he wins, he'll give the last place guy victory points instead of, the first place guy who's running away with the game at the moment. Like, those kinds of decisions will come into play. And to me, that's all far more interesting than just sitting here by myself and making the best decision possible every step of the way to not lose the war as fast. So I just said, screw it. I'm just going to play the cooperative or the competitive version of the game, which has its own rule book, and just play it, solo, and just play each character to make decisions that I think that particular character or player would make. And so, and it has been much more interesting so far. In the last game, or the two years that I'd played through in the last game, I never had any generals questioned. And in this, I've already had one case where a general was questioned. And In this case, it really just came down to the die rolling, actually, in that case, because I had put the best generals in command. This was, I think this was for the invasion of Greece, and I had, an AG head here in Yugoslavia, which I had invaded and taken over the previous turn. So I had the general here was going to be the one who was going to be the AG head that was leading this. Selected a lead general. In this case, the lead general was Karl Heinrich von Stupnagel, and he actually had, an ability that could be used there, which was against allied Western allies, which is what Greece becomes when you invade it. It becomes a Western allied country, and he had Axis attacks. Then this is in place, and you can cancel one plane result in the allied combat roll, which came into play. He was able to use his ability, and then the general that was in command of the AG head there was von Weichs, who also had +1 hit to the Axis combat roll in a rough terrain zone, which is what Salonika is. So they had the right, capable generals in there, but still ended up losing because I think I drew like a 2 or 3 die defense for the Axis, and they get a bonus die for being in a rough terrain zone. So I think I ended up rolling even. No, I think I ended up rolling lower die rolls, and so if it's lower when the Axis is attacking, if your number of hits is lower when the Axis is attacking, then the Allied number of hits, then you suffer defeat. In this case, I didn't have to retreat because I hadn't actually entered the space. I was in the process of, the first combat was to enter Salonika. So it ended up leading to Stupnagel getting questioned, and then on the subsequent command phase, you roll for dismissal of questioned generals, and you can see here his influence rating is a 1, so he's going to get dismissed because you have to roll lower than the influence rating in order to retain your command. If you roll higher than it, you get dismissed. And so, but when he gets dismissed, it adds +1 to the unrest value, which already happens if they get dismissed. So basically, he causes extra unrest when he gets dismissed. So that ended up, bumping the unrest level up to 2, and our fanaticism is currently only 3. So it's going to be lowering as the unrest jumps up to 3. So so we've had our first dismissal. We've had a couple of instances of doing the let's see here, of doing the fanaticism, the influence check, which is when anytime you pull a strategic event card, you look at the symbol up here in the upper left corner, and that determines a particular action that happens. And anytime this pops up is when you check influence. And so that is the different factions here start to track around the influence track. And that means basically when those strategic event cards come up and that symbol is there, then you check who your in-command generals are and who your activated generals are, and they will get your different factions, depending on who's in command and who's activated, will get points for those different factions. Meaning, and that'll be influenced by agenda cards, which you will get. You don't get at the start of the war. I think the agenda cards come out maybe after the reorganization of the high command card comes out, which should, I think, be coming up this year or next year. I need to look through the upcoming event cards, but regardless, so initially, there's not, the different heads of section don't have a particular reason to pick a general of a faction over another faction until they get agenda cards. Once the agenda cards come into play, then generals, then each head of section may want to have particular factions gain in influence in order to help them win the game. But currently, at the time those two strategic event cards were pulled, there weren't very many. We hadn't had very many military directives for that term, which is where you're going to usually end up with strategic event cards coming out during the Western Allies combat turns. And so we hadn't had that many turns before I had pulled multiple, and we hadn't had many military engagements where I've been assigning generals before I pulled those influence cards, in the strategic event deck. So the faction influences actually didn't jump a whole lot. The fanatics went up to 4, and the old guard went up to 8, because at the time the old guard had more in command generals, and those are worth 2 points apiece. So in this case, like the professional faction and the dissident faction haven't had any influence come onto the board at all yet. So they'll have to wait. And the strategic event deck, it was done, and those particular cards were pulled early. Everything I pulled on the strategic event deck later in the turn just advanced the USSR and US commitment tracks. So it will not be until we get our next strategic event card deck out there for 1941 that we'll see potentially see the faction influence track advance more. In terms of the prestige that's been going on right now, you can see player number 4 has jumped out to a pretty commanding lead. A big part of that was related to the fact that this General von Weichs here was the guy that was in command for multiple, as the AG head for multiple Eastern Europe campaigns, in this case Yugoslavia and Greece. So he was able to reap benefits of both of those. In addition to the fact that this player also had a number of other generals he had the guy that was involved in taking, was it Denmark and Norway? No, I'm trying to remember, because then von Weichs came back later to be the leading general in the invasion of Spain. That also got him some more prestige. So he's had cases where he was involved in gaining prestige, as well as the fact that he's the head of operations. And so the more military directives that you complete, usually the head of operations gets a prestige bonus for that as well. So having a lot of active generals on the board that are winning combats, as well as then completing a lot of military directives. And we've had a number of military directives. I haven't used diplomacy. I used diplomacy for Romania, Bulgaria, and for Hungary, but used military directives to invade Yugoslavia, to invade Greece. Used the paratroopers to make sure you get control of Crete, because that helps keep your ports open in North Africa. We got control of Italy through a strategic event card, which was literally just Italy enters the war. And that was, pull it up here. Yeah, Mussolini enters the war. That was 1940. Roll the Axis die. If you get a hit, activate Italy as a satellite. So this is a way you don't have to do diplomacy then to get Italy into the war. And so that just happened like towards the end of, I think the Fall Guild was already underway and Italy joined the war. So about how it happened historically. So that was not through diplomacy. So I think those are the only two. And then I did diplomacy for Vichy as well. Once I conquered France, I did diplomacy on Vichy and actually rolled a 6, which is what I needed. So ended up getting Vichy as a satellite instead of a neutral, independent state like Vichy was historically. But and the main reason I did that was because I wanted to invade Spain. Spain has a resource available, and controlling Spain gives you Gibraltar. So I did the invasion of Spain as a military directive in the autumn of 1940 and was able to succeed there, and gain those bonuses as well. So this will make North Africa a little bit easier to deal with because I don't have to face potentially enemies coming from this direction or that direction, and now it's just that direction. So question is for 1941 whether I want to focus on like a Middle Eastern invasion or if it's time to invade Russia. There is potentially 2 more resources to gain by either diplomatically taking Turkey, which I think is harder to do if you've taken Greece. I think you would be more likely to want to militarily invade Turkey if you've occupied Greece or have Greece as a satellite. And then I'm not even sure what the... there's no political capabilities against these 3 spaces because they're all Great Britain controlled. So, the other option would be Sea Lion, if I wanted to try and invade England instead of doing Russia in 1941. I think all that's available. The Sea Lion's available in 1940, so that'll be on the table. I think Turkey's available in 1940, so that would be on the table. And I think there's the military directive is the Libya Egypt offensive. So, now that I've got German troops down here in Africa, and I'd like to get at least 2 troops here. Although if I have just 1, I think I can still assign Rommel as the leading general for any combats that I do there. So that'll get Rommel into play. And I forget who has Rommel. I think it may be player 4 who's already... Yeah, he's got Rommel. And he's already... in the lead. So, and I just realized I don't actually need a panzer in North Africa if I'm using Rommel because he has 1 German army in the area is considered of the immediately superior type. So he can actually use a gray regular army as a panzer army. So really I should move this somewhere where it's going to be more useful and just put a regular army in North Africa. But that's going to be more opportunities for player number 4, who's also the head of operations, to just continue leaping ahead. So if the reorganization of the high command doesn't happen yet, I think in the New Year phase we rejigger the heads of sections. So player 4 may not be head of operations for much longer. So, but anyway, all of this that I've been talking about is what makes this much more interesting as a competitive game, using the competitive rules at least. Just because, it's just a huge part of the game to have the factions vying for control, to have the heads of section making decisions related to production or to tactical or operational movements or strategic movements on the map, making those decisions based on the prestige or production, the production directive decisions, making those decisions based on, if we can't let player 4 keep getting points. If player 4 gets 20 points ahead of the last player on prestige, the game ends and player 4 wins. They may have to start making decisions that are going to limit him, that are going to fly in the face of what you should be doing on the board out here. And that is like the heart of the game to me, it's that Republic of Rome type thing, the co-opetition where, we do need to try and prosecute the war as best we can, but we can't let individual players just run away with it and win. So sometimes we're going to have to make a decision that's not in the best interest of what's going to happen on the board in terms of the war effort. So, and that's just so much of the game, and it makes it much, much more interesting, much, much more entertaining, in my opinion. So, So that's where it's at. I'm starting the 1941 turn. I'll come back maybe at the end of the or at the start of the 1943 turn, maybe every 2 years, and see how the war effort's going, how the different factions are managing, and how the different players are comparing against each other. And by that point, the reorganization of the high command will have come into play, which changes how you flip these cards over. This is section of the high command, then it flips over to the reorganized high command, and stuff gets changed in terms of what sort of things these different roles get prestige points for. So I'll be curious to see how that changes the complexion of the game as well. It should have, again, more of an influence on the decisions that each player is going to make in order to prosecute the war effort and to satisfy their factions and to satisfy their prestige gains. So we'll check back in a bit.